I always have newer players ask me, how do I gain power? How do I push power? I want more power. What do I do? And I have to respond with, power is not as important as you think. Today, I will be giving you obviously the advantages of pushing your power, the disadvantages, and I will tell you throughout each stage of the game the best ways to push power. If you are in the end game, I will give you the cheapest, most efficient ways. If you're in the early game, I'll give you the cheapest and most efficient ways. I'll be giving you my secret tips on how I push power, and I will also tell you ways to manipulate your power. So A, you either have more power, or B, you have less power. And if you are interested in this, this is certainly a video you must watch, because power is immensely important for your account in many different ways. So let's just get right into the advantages of having a high power. First of all, you get access to the top alliances of your kingdom, and this can be extremely important, especially very early game, as accessing main alliances is the best way to push anything. Training troops being in the top alliance will give you a bunch of buffs, and a bunch of alliance tech which reduce speed-ups. Upgrading buildings, you get a bunch of helps. Doing research, you get a bunch of helps. Stuff like that are really important, and being in a main alliance, especially in an early kingdom, is the best way to access that, as early kingdoms have tens of thousands of active players, especially in the first 2 weeks, and being in a main alliance is the best way to get an advantage over all of those players. So the only way to do that is really to have a high power, as they're not really looking for kills. The only other way you could get in is, I guess, bribing with resources, or you could have some type of leadership experience or something valuable to offer their alliance rather than your power. But the easiest way for most players is having a high power. The next thing to do with power that's extremely important is you get advantages in some events. For example, your Ark of Osiris. Having a player with meta commanders and 100 million power is obviously going to beat a player that has 80 million power and meta commanders as well. Because in Ark, troops are the most important thing. Troops and commanders make a powerful account. So a player with more troops is obviously more valuable than a player with less troops. If you are doing competitive Ark, you often need a high power or a lot of speed ups to be healing your troops in Ark of Osiris. But a player with over 150 million power is usually the most amount of troops you're going to need for an Ark from my personal experience and other players who have similar powers. The next thing that really does benefit you from having a lot of power is not really being able to get zeroed. When I say that, I mean you are much harder to zero than a player with 50 million power like myself. If someone with max tech rallied my city and I have 50 million power, maybe I have a good garrison, my city's still gonna die like instantly. Like it's just gonna burn, that's it, my city's gone. If I had 120 million power and someone rallied my city, okay, my city's probably going to survive that first rally. That's pretty much the way that works. Often a city will still survive their first rally even at 50 million power, like they will still have enough hospital capacity to heal it, but being able to have a higher power means they won't swarm you after, and you can really just take advantage of being rallied to benefit yourself in getting yourself more kills. So that's one situation where power is also really good. At some point when you reach 300 million power like these people have, you're basically unzeroable. Like it's really, really hard. You have to completely mess up, like have the wrong commanders, be offline, have war frenzy possibly and get imprisoned 3 times in a row, and have 6 people rallying you at the same time to really zero you. But situations like that are extremely rare, and I've only ever seen it happen like once or twice, and they weren't even above like 200 million power. So situations like that are, yes, they can happen, but they're not too common. And for most players above like 200 million power, they are basically impossible to zero, and that's something you should keep in mind. Now, what are the negatives of having a high power? And the first one is you need to contribute more to your KVK. A higher power often means you have to kill more troops, fight more players, and basically do more for the kingdom. Now, I'm not saying that is bad. You should obviously be doing as much as you can to help your fellow kingdom members, but the issue arises where A, you probably do not have enough money to maintain that, or B, you don't have enough time. Often players with over 100 million power have requirements of like 3 million dead troops, having 30 million kills, contributing a certain amount of resources sometimes, and things like that can be A, very costly on your account, especially if you want to maintain that power constantly, and B, very time consuming. Unless you have 5 marches or 6 marches or even 7 marches sitting in a fort by themselves to get swarmed down and killed, it's basically extremely hard to kill 3 million troops in one day. You're going to have to kill them over the span of the whole KVK, fighting actively the whole time. So for some players, this may be too big of a commitment, and that's a reason that my power is lower. I can't deal with those extremely high KVK contributions. I just want to know that no matter what happens, I will still be safe. Of course, I'm still going to try and push to have like 1 million dead troops and 15 to 30 million kills, but if I don't make it there, I'm okay because I'm only 52 million power. I'm not even in the top 300 of my kingdom. That brings me on to the next thing. If you are a high power, you often affect your kingdom's migration, and that's another reason they may be harsh on requirements. Being in the top 300 power of your kingdom means that your power affects which people they can bring into the kingdom. And for an Imperium kingdom or for a very, very competitive A-seed kingdom, things like that are extremely important. If you have a player who's in the top 300, even if they are barely in the top 300 and they are not contributing enough, they're zeroed, they're out of there, they're gone. So not being able to contribute enough while in the top 300 of your kingdom, which is obviously influenced by power, often means that you could get zeroed and lose all of your power anyways, and being zeroed without zeroing yourself is much harder to recover from. Next thing is migrating to other kingdoms. They will often look at your power. So if you have an extremely high power, and I'm just going to go onto the board right now and I'm going to go to a random player with high power. If they have a low kill points, I will tell you, and then I will tell you if that's going to really affect them. So no offense to this player, but let's say this player as an example. They've got 594 million kill points and 86 million power. Most very, very competitive kingdoms will not accept that, purely because this is a very high amount of power, 86 million power, but a fairly low amount of kill points for the power. Not saying they are not an active and very powerful player, but I'm saying that most kingdoms who are extremely competitive are looking for an account that's 84 million power with like 2 to 3 billion kill points. And stuff like that can really affect your migration. Also, if you don't have a lot of deads on your account, it can often be another way that people just don't accept you into a kingdom. And it's extremely tough to get into a kingdom the higher your power is. If you are above 150 million power, it is extremely, extremely tough to get into a kingdom. Even though really above 150 million power, your power is not counted, they still are very strict on which 150 million power plus players are let into the kingdom. So often if you are above 150 million power, they just don't let you in, purely because it's easier to get a player that's at like 400 or 500 million power than get someone that's just above 150 million. You can see if we just go on our KVK leaderboard, it really just jumps from 149 to like 200 million. There are a few like low 150s, but they must have just pushed before the start of their KVK. So having power at specific thresholds can be a bit frustrating. Also, migrating costs more passports the higher your power is, and it's very difficult to grind passports as a free-to-play. Like, they are 600,000 credits each, and for me personally, it would take at least 3 months of pure just grinding all of these alliance credits to get out of a kingdom if I really wanted. Like, I need about like 25, I don't know the exact amount of passports, but that's extremely expensive. It's like 12 million credits, 15 million I think total. A very high power account is going to take a lot of passports to migrate, and even at some point, max buying the bundle for migration isn't actually enough to get out of a kingdom. You often have to max buy the new board bundle like 3 to 4 times to really benefit from that. So that's another reason I don't really recommend pushing power. Now, also, having unequal commander power with your actual power can be very, very detrimental. For example, let's say I was 100 million power and I had a best march of a Gilgamesh with a Nebuchadnezzar. That was my best march. You can see right there, my account is not valuable in any way. My best march is a old rally combo, an old field combo. That doesn't work anymore, really. I would not be running a Gilgamesh Nebu anymore for most players. So that's one situation where power can be negative. You're 100 million power, but without meta commanders, no kingdom's really going to want you, or you're going to struggle to meet your requirements a lot. And that could either lead to you being zeroed and losing all your power, or being forced out of your kingdom and trying to find a kingdom to go to with really, really high power, but trash commanders and possibly low kills can be really, really tough. Now, how do you really gain power? In the early game, the easiest way, like the very early game, is just getting commanders. You can see that having a commander gives you a certain amount of power. Obviously, mine are max, so they give me more power, but leveling up an epic commander can give you up to like 20,000 power really easily. And if you want to get in those top alliances, this is the best way to do it. Just open gold chests and level up your commanders. Make sure you put your talent points in because they give you a fair amount of power in the early game. And then you'll be able to get in the top alliances as you're kind of manipulating your power. Next, another way to gain power, this is more towards the mid game, is really your buildings, ensuring that you've got your technology up to a good point, especially your engineering, which gives you a lot of build speed, allows you for events like Mightiest Governor or the Game of Power event, or even a Zenith event in some really early kingdoms, to just upgrade a bunch of buildings and get a bunch of really easy power. Having a level 25 City Hall, for example, is 2 million power. Yes, it's expensive, but it's much easier than pushing your technology, especially in the early game, towards like the start of your KVK 1. Now, towards the end of your KVK 1, you've probably maxed out your City Hall, maxed out a bunch of buildings, and that's where the Academy becomes a lot more powerful, because having a lot of these economic technologies kind of just sitting here, maybe you didn't go too hard in on like open pit quarry and stone saw and carriage, things like this, which don't really matter. But once you really want to gain power, if you really, really want to push it for a Mightiest Governor, these become really powerful, especially if you've got mathematics and writing high enough. You can kind of just push these economic technologies, which are super cheap, like 2 to 3 days of speed ups at their max, and just get a bunch of power really quick. For example, let's say I had carriage at 9, stone saw, machinery, shaft mining, open quarry, and mathematics at 8 for some reason. I could get all of those up for about 20 days worth of speed ups, not a very cheap amount of resources, but a pretty low amount, and I'd get maybe 5 million power, and that would be really, really good. You obviously, towards the middle end game, I want to say, is when you get the military technology, and this is where it becomes really, really expensive, but it's a good way to gain power. You can see here 53 days of speed ups, but I get 500,000 power. So if you have a lot of speed ups to spare, but you don't really care about the resources and you just want to get the power as soon as you can, this is obviously another way to gain a massive bulk of power in a very short period of time. It can be really good if you're trying to snipe an event to do it this way. Towards the end game, training tier 5 troops is the best way to gain power, as tier 5 troops disproportionately give you power compared to speed ups. So one batch of tier 5 troops of 2,000 is about a day and a half of speed ups, while a batch of tier 4 troops, 2,000 of them, is a day of speed ups. So you can see that tier 4 troops, which give you 4 power per troop, compared to a tier 5 troop, which gives you over double at 10 power per troop, is obviously more valuable in terms of speed ups because they cost less speed ups but give you more power. So you can see tier 5 troops are a better value because their speed up to power ratio is better. The resources on tier 5 troops are also slightly less expensive when you're pushing power, as the resource to power ratio is also extremely high. Now, what are some ways to manipulate your power? And there are a few ways. First of all, if you're a really high power and you just want to get out of a kingdom and you're in a KVK, fill a bunch of flags. Just keep filling flags. Kill as many troops as you can. You know what? Swarm a city. Swarm an enemy fortress. Doing stuff like that will A, recklessly use your troops. So if you just want to get out quickly, that's a good way. Or B, you're going to just do it in a controlled manner where you know that you are basically zeroing yourself, but you are in KVK. So after your Hall of Heroes finishes, you can get yourself a nice rebate in terms of dead troops. But when you go to migrate to a kingdom, they look at your power, you're maybe 60 million, but in fact, actual fact, after your Hall of Heroes comes back, you'll be like 100 million. Stuff like that is another way to manipulate power, and it's how I personally got into a kingdom before. I manipulated my power to go down to 38 million, so I could use less passports to get into a kingdom. It was very expensive to drop that much power, but I got most of it back after the KVK ended, and it's a good way to A, hide your power if you are trying to be a little bit shifty, or B, just to be able to save yourself some passports. Another way to hide power is to fill your hospital. If you fill your hospital with troops, your power does go down. So if for some reason you want to escape a kingdom scan or you want to get out of the kingdom for cheaper once again, you could fill a hospital, especially if it's a KVK hospital with double capacity. You could fill that with troops, and then obviously it's a much, much higher capacity, which means if you have a full tier 5 hospital, it's like 5 to 7 million power worth of troops, if I remember correctly. So that is a lot of power to just have in a hospital, and it's really, really good to have that if you're trying to migrate. Let's say you're at 50 million power, you fill a hospital, you're at 43. So stuff like that are important to keep in mind. For really early game players, for some reason, if you want to drop power, you could just take equipment off a commander. So let's say my Boudica right now, if I remove power, technically I lose her commander power, but it's still in my inventory. So the equipment's still in my inventory, but the power disappears. That's one way to manipulate your power. You could also do it the other way around, where you could put equipment that's in your inventory on a bunch of commanders, even though you may not use the equipment yet. You just have the equipment there and it's increasing your power, so that's a way to manipulate it. In some situations, to hide your troops, which are linked with your power, you can fill alliance flags and then teleport into a zone. Maybe you're going to hit a bunch of farmers. You teleport into a zone, they rally your 80 million power account, but all that's there is a Belisarius and a Nevsky that's in a fort rally that's basically hiding as well. So there is a way to basically hide all of your troops. That's to fill a flag with a bunch of like extenders, maybe a 50% extension, fill it with 4 marches, use your 5th march to battle around, and then you can't be zeroed basically because your troops are in a secret flag in the middle of nowhere that only kingdom members from your kingdom can access. Now, if I gave you some value in manipulating power, gaining power, the advantages and disadvantages of power, please consider subscribing to the channel as I try to push this quality content each day. The first recording of this actually corrupted, and this is my second recording, so please appreciate my dedication by clicking the subscribe button. We're going for 1,000 subscribers by June 27th when I start my all Siege Restart account. It's going to be a fun time. I just want to say thank you for watching, and I hope to see you in the next one.